Have you ever been on a joyride? A joyride is defined as a pleasure ride in an automobile or used without the owner's permission. Personally, I can't think of ever doing that because girls in Catholic school just didn't do that sort of thing, not without major consequences. I have been on many trips, however, that have brought a lot of joy to me. Not long after my husband and I met, he invited me to meet his family in Texas. We decided to drive rather than to fly so that we could get to know one another a little better. We even called it our Get to Know Your Buddy trip. It wasn't exactly a Thelma and Louise moment, but it was most definitely a joy-filled ride. Other than getting to know one another, which produced a lot of joyful moments, there was a specific moment on our trip when I actually saw joy through my future husband. It was the moment we drove west through the skyscrapers and suburbs of the Dallas-Fort Worth area when suddenly the sky literally opened up. It was the biggest, bluest sky I had ever seen. Jimmy told me about it, but I didn't believe it until I saw it myself. The land was dry and brown with few trees, other than vertically challenged mesquite trees, cacti, and certainly a rattlesnake or two. And then, after about an hour or so going west on Interstate 20, we began seeing the mesas, those flat-topped hills that dominate the landscape of semi-arid West Texas. The sky was so spacious, it's like the landscape decided to become a backdrop to the blue sea in the sky. It was that moment, that very moment, that I looked at Jimmy, who was wiping tears from his eyes. I asked him why he was crying. He claimed that they were tears of joy. At first, I didn't understand. We had left the rolling hills of Kentucky and had driven through the rocky tops of Tennessee, through Arkansas, the natural state, and through the majestic pine woods of East Texas. Now, here we are, surrounded by brown grass and rocks. For my future husband, however, because he was going home, making a trip he had made many times before, he was seeing the same land I was seeing, only with a different set of eyes and emotions. He was emotionally invested in the trip, much more than I was. I was seeing the land for the very first time, so my joy was that of a first-time explorer. He was seeing the land for the umpteenth time. Memories of past trips and a multi-generational connection to the land allowed him to look past the obvious, those obvious handicaps of that land. We were both on a joy-filled ride, and yet the joy was born in different wombs. My joy was new and fresh. His joy was old and deep-seated. It was like being on very different levels of heaven. On my level, the angels were barely visible. On his level, the angelic chorus was trumpeting through the skies. Now that Jimmy and I have been back to West Texas on many occasions, more than I signed up for, I have begun to understand that the joy he experiences as our car takes us to the very first set of flat-top hills and gigantic skies is a joy ride of biblical proportions. Joy comes in many shapes and sizes. It occurs daily in small doses and occasionally even in grand doses. It is rarely produced on purpose, For the most part, it just happens when it happens. Joy is more often an emotional trip that takes us to the edge of wonder and then, usually without notice, brings us back to the state of our normalcy. A joy ride of biblical proportions, however, is not an experience as much as a vision. It is a vision we have of something not rooted in reality, not yet at least. In Isaiah 35, the prophet writes about a joy-filled ride of biblical proportions. He gives the Israelites a vision of a future trip that awaits the people of God when they re-enter the land from which they came. The historical context for this passage is unclear. Either the people have been dispersed by the Assyrians or they have been exiled by the Babylonians. Either way, they are people who have been robbed of their homeland. So, Isaiah paints a picture of a trip across dry and hostile lands to the place where all their emotions are invested. This is a joyride, one where the skies open up and the people see what isn't necessarily there. And yet, what's important is not what can be seen. What's important is the hope that it represents. When joy is present, according to Isaiah, the wilderness and dry land becomes glad, and the desert rejoices and blossoms. The burning sands become pools of water. Weak hands become strong. Feeble knees become firm. Fearful hearts become strong. Blind eyes are open. Deaf ears are unstopped. The lame leap like deer. Speechless tongues sing. Wild animals are tamed. The ransom returned, while the wilderness gives way to a highway. Only those with eyes to see can clearly see what God is doing. Only those with ears to hear can pick up those angelic sounds. Centuries later, the skies open up again. Humanity was soon to embark on another joyride of biblical proportions. This time, the highway has been prepared by a wilderness-dwelling man named John the Baptist. Unfortunately, this was no joyride for John. His road paving had landed him in Herod's prison, and yet, even from his prison cell, word reached him that something big was happening. John had heard what his former protege, Jesus of Nazareth, was doing. Much like Isaiah of old, John was able to see past the lack of greenery and blossoming flowers. John was able to get a glimpse of the hidden beauty of the man from Nazareth. What he saw was hidden from most people, much like the raw beauty of West Texas landscape is hidden from those who are used to a more obvious beauty of snow-capped mountains, deep forests, and lively vegetation. John convinced his disciples to ask Jesus if he was indeed the one. Jesus' answer sends a clear message to John that yes, you have heard and seen what others aren't yet able to discern, that the blind can see, the lame can walk, the lepers are clean, the deaf can hear, the dead rise up, and the poor receive good news. Like Isaiah's prophecy from long ago, Jesus is speaking of a vision that only those who are tuned to the landscape of life can see and hear. For those who can see, the skies of heaven are opening up. For those who can hear, The angelic choir is gathering in the clouds. The way has been cleared. The Advent adventure continues. This is a joy ride of biblical proportions. So let's go for a ride. Amen.